This is Molly Jacobs from Project Oceanology, and I'm here today at the Hallville Fishway. This is a really cool location around the Preston Ledyard border, and the big structure that's here, if you turn around, is this dam here, the Hallville Dam, and that separates Hallville Pond, which is upstream, from Hoquatonic Brook, which is downstream. So when we posted this Facebook Live, we asked the question, how could fish use a ladder? Do you think fish could use a ladder? We're going to try to answer that today. And so if you have ideas about that, go ahead and type them in the comment section, and we will try to address that. So this is a really cool location because a fish ladder has been built to help fish get past the Hallville Dam. So I'm here with two very special guests who are going to help us understand how this works and why this site was chosen. And so our first guest is Dan Mullins. He's from the Eastern Connecticut Conservation District. And Dan, your organization was responsible for coming up with this fish ladder, right?
Well, yeah, it started before my time. I started at the district in 2014. The construction of this ended in the fall of 2013, so a year before I started. And I'm sure that my predecessor, Scott Gephardt, worked with Steve Gephardt, and I'm sure Steve had this site picked out for a long time based on the historical runs that came through the river system here, Hoquatonic Brook. And I heard Steve mention in the past that there used to be about 500,000 alewife that ran through the system. So they had this site picked out, and
so you said a very funny sounding word there, alewife. What is an alewife?
Well, alewife is a type of migratory fish, anadromous fish, that migrate from their freshwater spawning grounds, and then they go out to the ocean to mature, and they come back to spawn again in the river. Okay.
And so was this designed with alewives in mind, this fish ladder?
Yep. The alewife are the target species for this fish ladder. It's also allowing American eel. There's a tube down here, which Steve will point out when he's talking, to allow American eel to come up the Fishway as well.
Okay, excellent. And so how long has this fish ladder been here?
Since 2013, so about 7 years.
Okay. And why did you pick this particular location here at Hallville Pond?
Well, the downriver from here is relatively clear. I know that Connecticut Deep did some obstruction removal in the terms of barriers, trees and stuff, but this was the next upriver barrier, so they designed the Fishway to move the fish from the brook into Hallville Pond.
Okay, so if you and I were to get into a boat right now and go down this brook, where would we end up?
Down at Hoquatonic Cove.
So we'd follow this brook, it would come out at Hoquatonic Cove, and then if we kept going, where would we go?
It takes you into Thames River and then Long Island Sound.
Okay, so we're directly connected from here to Long Island Sound that direction.
Correct.
All right. Now, what if we put our boat in the pond up there?
You could paddle across the pond. You can see the other edge. I guess that's about a half a mile or so. And then it kind of veers toward the east, toward the left. And there's a small dam there called the Straight Pond Dam, which the district and Deep partnered on several years ago to modify that dam so that the alewife that are passing up over the dam will then be able to go through the notch that we created in that dam. Okay. Therefore restoring a more habitat for potential spawning grounds.
So it sounds like maybe it's not as simple as just building one fish ladder.
Well, it depends on the system, you know, how many barriers there are and how much potential habitat you have upstream. So Steve and his crew determined way back that there's quite a bit of restorable habitat upstream from here. So you start working downriver and then work your way up.
Okay.
So like I said, we removed part of a dam across the pond here.
Yep.
And now currently we're in the design phase to design a fishway at the Hallville Dam, which is up in Ledyard.
Okay. And now, how does something like this happen? You just decide you need a fish ladder and it happens, or is it more complicated than that?
It's more complicated than that. Like I said, you know, Steve and Deep, they have a migratory fish plan in place, and they work from that. They find viable projects, and then it's a matter of going out and getting the funding as well.
Okay. And so where does the funding come from for something like this?
So this funding, Steve, you're going to have to help me with that, but part of this funding came from a mitigation fund from Connecticut DEEP
Okay.
and NIFWF, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, Long Island Sound Futures Fund, provided funding as well.
Okay, so it sounds like you had to reach out to a number of different sources to build this. That suggests to me that these alewives are pretty important. And so I think that maybe brings us for now to our next special guest, whose name is Steve Gephardt from DEP, and he is a specialist in fish like alewives. What we're going to do right now, so we're going to have a little bit of a mic transfer. We're all trying to be socially distant here, and so we're going to pass off our microphone from Dan to Steve, and we could always pass it back to him if we come up with more questions for Dan. So Steve is an expert on all kinds of anadromous fish. Has any of you ever heard of an anadromous fish? Or know what that term means? Well, it's a fish that spends part of its life in the freshwater and also part of its life in the ocean. And so when you think of a fish like that, you might think of something like a salmon, right? Salmon are famous for leaping up streams and spawning. Well, it turns out lots of fish do that. Alewives are just one example. Eels are another example. And here in Connecticut, we're lucky to have a number of these really cool fish. And we're still learning a lot more about them. So I'll introduce Steve Gephardt right here. He is in charge of the anadromous fish program at Connecticut DEP or CT Deep.
So let's clarify a little bit that you said anadromous fish and you included eels.
Oh.
But eels are catadromous. They go the other way. They start their life in saltwater, come to freshwater, and then turn around and go back to saltwater to spawn. So they're catadromous, but if you put anadromous and catadromous together, you get diadromous, and that's what my program deals with, is these migratory fish that go back and forth from the ocean in both directions.
So these streams are like highways where fish are going back and forth.
Absolutely. And you
for all
know,
sorts of reasons.
A lot of migrations are pretty obvious. You can, in the spring, you can look up and see the birds migrating, and you can see butterflies coming and going. But in fact, even though most people don't realize it, we have all sorts of migrations going on under the water in these streams. So alewives, we still have, we've lost a number of species, including Atlantic salmon, because they have to go way up into the river systems, and we built so many dams we wipe those out. But the alewives can spawn down below in some of the ponded habitat, and because of that, they were able to spawn. All the dams didn't wipe them out completely. So we have some left, and now our job, so many years later, is to open this habitat back up again.
So Steve, like this dam here, that was a complete barrier for those alewives. They couldn't get past it anyway. It was just too big.
Unlike salmon, alewives don't jump.
Okay.
So, and even this dam would be too much for a salmon.
So,
but they even a 3-foot dam can stop alewives.
Oh wow.
And so for the past 100 or so years, the locals would come down here and they'd see thousands of alewives swarming below this dam.
Oh wow.
And everyone said, we ought to do something about it. Well, finally, working with the Eastern Connecticut Conservation District, we put together a team with the dam owner, and we built this ladder to get them up and around. And so now they're reconnected to all of this upstream habitat, and they can increase their numbers.
So is it fair to say that like this pond and all the areas upstream of this, there's never been an alewife there for more than 100 years till this fish ladder was built?
That's absolutely true.
Wow.
Historically, we think that this run went all the way up to Amos Lake.
Oh wow.
And then you started building all these dams, and incrementally the fish lost their part of their habitat until finally this dam was, well, actually there was a dam even farther down, but that breached. So the alewives were pretty much locked out of this system. So, and I don't remember the dates of construction. I think this is like 1840. The one down below may have been even older. And so, yes, it's been a long time since these fish have been back up into this historic habitat.
So what makes us think that they're going to do okay up here now?
Well, we've looked at the habitat, and the habitat is still good. They like ponded areas. And we don't want people to think this is the only Fishway in the state of Connecticut.
Right.
We've built about 65 of these. and we've had a lot of experience and a lot of success. So it's worked in other places that don't have as good a habitat as this stream does, so we're confident. Now, the one thing about this is this fishway has yet to pass thousands of fish. It's passed, I don't know, hundreds, and that's because the population was depressed so far. But we've been now stocking alewives up into Amos Lake and Avery and farther up, and those fish, let's just explain for a minute how these fish get home.
Yeah, tell us more about these alewives, because they seem really cool.
It's their sense of smell. So what happens is they don't find their home stream by genetics, because if they did, once you lost a run, you could never get it back. It's a learned behavior and it's a sense of smell. So the little ones that go out in the fall memorize or imprint to the odor of the stream. They go out to sea and may spend 2 to 4 years out in the ocean. When they're coming back in to spawn, they seek out that familiar odor. And they can tell the difference between Pocatonic Brook and Trading Cove Brook or the Connecticut River or the Housatonic River, and they'll follow their nose and come up. And so what we do to restart a run is we go to Bride Brook in East Lyme, which is our premier alewife run, and we've got a trap there.
So how many alewives are in Bride Brook if it's the premier run?
400 to 500,000.
Whoa.
So we take a small amount. We take about 1,000 of those fish, and we truck them up to the headwaters here of Amos and Avery and those areas. They'll spawn and produce a whole generation of little, what we call young of the year. The adults will go back to sea, and next year, those that are still survived and ready to spawn, they'll go back to Bryce Brook, because that's their home stream. That's what they imprinted to. But the little ones have never been to Bryce Brook. The only freshwater they know is Pocatonic Brook, or whatever name you call this brook. This brook has like 4 different names. and that's where they'll come back. So that's how we jumpstart the population again.
Great. So
let's take a look at the fishway. Let's imagine the fish as they're coming up. And these alewives, they do not social distance. When they come in thick in schools, and they'll come in right along the base of the dam. But you'll notice the entrance of the fishway is close to the bottom of the dam. And it may take them a few minutes of searching, but eventually they'll find that entrance to the fishway. And they'll enter it. And they don't know that it's a fishway. They don't know it's something that we've done for them. All they know is it's springtime. They have a strong upstream urge. They have a strong urge to swim upstream. So you see the lower concrete pool. It turns them and orients them into this lower ramp of this metal fishway that you can see going upstream. And it's called a steep pass fishway. That's prefabricated and dropped in at a particular slope. Then we have a turn pool, and that turn pool not only reorients the direction so they can aim up to the head pond, but it gives them resting opportunities, because these fish, we don't ask the fish to go more than 8 vertical feet without a rest. Sort of like a landing in a staircase. And then once they've rested and reoriented themselves, they come up this other top ramp of steep pass fishway. And as we walk over here, you can get an idea of the design of the steep pass. It's a 2-foot wide trough, and the slope is about 1-on-5. But inside that trough are veins. And those veins are welded in a manner that as the descending water passes, it shoots the water back onto itself. And that turbulence slows down the rush of the water and makes it able for at least some of the stronger swimming fish, like alewives in the stream, to be able to come back up again, back up.
So that reminds me of a question. At the beginning, we asked if any of the viewers had any ideas about how a fish might use a ladder, and it sounds like, Steve, that you're answering that. So I think some people probably think they might jump up a ladder like a salmon.
Yes, they don't.
But they don't.
Once they enter these aluminum stretches of steep pass, they have to keep swimming. They cannot stop.
Oh, so-
Because if they stop, they get washed back down. They can rest at that turn pool that we saw, but that's it. Once they enter these slope sections with the veins, they have to keep swimming. Now, it may take them 20, maybe 30 seconds to swim up there, and then they get to the exit pool. Once they're up here, they're pretty much home free. They're at pond level. And they, while there still is a current, they don't have to swim as hard. And as they come up here, what we do, we bring them across here by this funny looking thing. Underneath that grate is a room. It's a small room, and there's a video camera there, and there's a glass window underneath here. And as the fish swim by that underwater window, they get their picture taken with digital video. And then, of course, they keep on going out, and they enter the head pond, and away they go. They head upstream to spawn. Now, the reason this board is here, all of this wood, every fishway is a little different. After we started operating this fishway, we realized the glare from the sun was interfering with the imagery of the video. So this is all this is a sunscreen, a sunshade, so that we get good images.
So Steve, does the video camera allow you to count every fish that comes through the fishway, or just some of them?
All of them. We've designed it in a little bit of a bottom baffle that forces all the fish to swim right up in the view of the camera. And the camera is on the far wall, and we've chosen the lens carefully so it takes in the entire window.
So is it the person with the short straw that has to sit down there and watch the video?
Nobody sits down there. No. So that's a confined space. But what we do is we capture the video, and every few days, one of my staff comes by and downloads that video onto a stick, and then takes that back to our lab in Old Lyme. It sits in front of, well, these days at home.
At home.
Sits in front of a playback station and views all the fish coming, and there's a timestamp on it too. And so not only can we count the fish, but we can identify them to species. And while alewives are the main species here, we've seen all sorts of fish. We see a lot of wild brook trout pass through here. We've seen white suckers and bass and all manners of things, including a couple of pickerel, which I would have never guessed would have come up this fishway, but they proved me wrong.
Why wouldn't a pickerel come?
Because their swimming speed, they don't have the same strength that some of the other species. The fact that pickerel are using it tells us that this is a well-designed fishway, that it's not too challenging. And I should, at this point, mention that the design of a fishway is a very deliberate manner. This is not just something you throw together. It's a collaboration between fish specialists who know the biology and the behavior of fish, and hydraulic engineers who understand water and hydraulics.
So can you tell us, so all these crazy cool fish come through here, but it sounds like alewives were the inspiration for this fish
Oh, absolutely.
ladder. So can you tell us a little more, why are they so important? Why do we care so much about restoring the alewives to this area?
You know, that's a good question, because when you think of migratory fish, the really charismatic fish that everybody knows about are salmon, whether they be Atlantic or Pacific, or sometimes sturgeon. A lot of people get excited about striped bass. Alewife are none of those things. They're not good to eat, well, for humans. They're not fun to fish for. The reason why they're so important is they are a key forage species, both in saltwater and freshwater. I always talk about them as the field mice of the ocean. Everything eats them. You know, colonial nesting birds and ospreys and striped bass and marine mammals. In here in freshwater, we've got kingfishers and great blue herons and black-crowned night herons. Everything eats these things. And so it's really important to keep their populations in the ocean strong, so that they'll support what are the species we consider more valuable, and for our freshwater ecosystems, because a lot of these watersheds in Connecticut are fairly low productivity because they've all been glaciated. And so there's not a lot of energy and nutrition in these rivers. And so every year, you know, historically, a gazillion of these fish streamed into our watersheds, went upstream all the way. They got eaten, they died, they got recycled, and it was sustainable, of course. And it fed all sorts of fish and wildlife species.
So
when we lost these runs, we lost a big chunk of the ecosystem. So while my job is to restore fish runs, what we're really doing is we're restoring a chunk of the ecosystem.
Wow. So what are some things, so if we get alewives coming back, say, to this pond in big numbers, what are some other things we might expect to see? Will we see more herons?
Oh, absolutely. We'll
Okay.
see more herons, but the first thing we'll see more of is ospreys. Because
Osprey.
they'll follow them right up the brook. They,
Oh, wow.
Ospreys have an amazing sense of where the fish are. And we've seen that in a lot of our fishways. We know when the alewives are in before we even check the tapes, because there's ospreys flying around or perching on dead trees. And so we'll see ospreys, we'll see, as you say, all of the herring and colonial nesting species we'll see. The other thing what we see is the freshwater fishing opportunities in the pond skyrocket. In Gorton Pond in East Lyme on the Patagonic River, they used to catch bass and pickerel this big, and after we restored alewives, now they're catching bass and pickerel this big.
Oh, that's going to be good news for a lot of folks around here, yeah.
There's just a lot more food,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Wow. That's
So let's,
awesome.
before we forget about the other species, let's take a look at this
Oh.
eel pass.
Yeah.
So one of the things, American eels are really an amazing species, and they need our help too because they can't get over this dam. But they also cannot use this fishway because eels, while they're clever migrants and they can go out of the water and they can wiggle up wet rocks and things, they're not strong swimmers. And the water velocity going down that fishway is just too much for eels. So for eels, we install this eel pass, which is this white pipe down below, and it feeds off of the top of the fishway. That eel pass is full of plastic balls, almost like wiffle balls. And they have all sorts of surface, they've got all sorts of holes in them and surface areas. And so when the water comes down, it's not like that pipe is full of water because it's mostly clogged with these plastic balls, and so only a little water comes out. But what it does is the eels are exploring. They can't get up the dam, they can't get up the fishway. They find the water coming out of that pipe and they wiggle up through that pipe all the way, and you can see it. It takes a bend underneath the fishway. It comes down here, there's a gate there, and then it joins the floor of this concrete fishway to our left. And so they can then exit the fishway along with the alewives and the brook trout, go right up to the head pond.
That's awesome. So,
Oh yeah.
so right now, this is a relatively recent fish ladder, right? Fishway, and then and you've been doing this restocking. And so, is it a wait and see time? Like, when would we expect the runs to start coming back?
Really,
long
right
is it?
now,
Okay.
we've had an early run in New London County this year in 2020, and we've seen a lot more fish in other streams. It hasn't really begun here yet, but this beautiful sunny day, it's all about water temperature.
All right.
And so now with today and tomorrow being in the 60s, the water's going to warm up, and now they're going to start coming back soon. And so we're monitoring it. We always try to have the fishways open before the first fish come back, so we see zeros on our data sheet, and then we can see them build up. So yeah, it's and you know, the other thing I'll say is excuse me. So this is one of about 64, 65 fishways in the state of Connecticut, and so we repeat this. Everyone is uniquely adapted to the dam, and everyone is uniquely adapted to the property and who owns it and all. And we've been really fortunate here to be working in close association with a dam owner, the Pila Brothers Electrical Company. They've been great. And
this dam isn't used for anything anymore, isn't that right?
No, but I shall say they wanted to retain the dam. They may have some future plans for it, or
Okay.
they just like it. Because our first step, let's be clear, our first step is we'd like to remove more dams. There's over 4,000 dams in the state of Connecticut, and most of them are abandoned and useless. Some are not, some are valuable. So if we find a useless dam that's blocking fish runs, our first attempt is to remove the dam. But if the owner values the dam and does not want to remove it, like was the case here, then option B is to build a fishway.
That's great. So this project is completed and we're just watching the fish runs. Is there any, do you have a project that's going on right now that you're excited about elsewhere in Connecticut?
You're asking the wrong guy. I've got too many projects I'm excited
Okay.
about.
Yeah.
I'm very excited about the project that Dan and the Eastern Connecticut Conservation District is doing upstream of here at Hallville. It's only in the design phase, so it'll be a number of years before it's passing fish, but it's the next step and perhaps the last step to getting the fish to Amos Lake. We're also building a fishway right now on the Farm River in North Branford, and that fishway is probably about 80% done, and hopefully that will be passing fish this spring. We also are working with a hydro developer on the Farmington River in Collinsville. They're doing a multi-million-dollar hydro renovation of a dam, and they're building a state-of-the-art fishway there as well. In fact, I'm heading there next. And we've got all sorts of other proposals in the works. People are applying for grants to do other projects, so we've got a list of over a dozen projects in one stage of development or another, either from the idea phase, in the planning design phase, or in the construction phase.
That's great. Well, I hope everyone has enjoyed learning about fish ladders with us today. I'm Molly Jacobs from Project Oceanology, and our guests have been Steve Gephardt from Connecticut DEP and Dan Mullins from the Eastern Connecticut Conservation District. Stay tuned for more Facebook Live sessions. Project Oceanology is going to be live tomorrow, Tuesday morning at 9:30. And I hear that Connecticut DEP may be doing some similar live videos in the future, or thinking about it.
Yeah, we're going to try to do the same thing. This is a great idea. We thank you for this opportunity. We're going to post your link on this,
Yeah.
and we'll share ours. Thank you.
Yeah, it was great work. Thank you, gentlemen.